And if you look very carefully in the histogram here, that shows us exactly where along the curve those particular tones are. So say for instance that we wanted to lighten this particular tone, we'd simply click and hold, and we can see that it's located on the curve just about at the crossover of those two lines of the overlaying graph there. Now, unfortunately, where in the curves dialog we can actually hold down one of the keyboard shortcuts to plot a point on this curve, within the HDR conversion we can't do that. So just take a note of where that is, and then we'll simply click a point on the curve there. Now, to lighten that particular tone, we can simply drag it upwards, and to darken it, we'll drag it down. And you can see that being reflected real time in the image itself. I just want to lighten those tones just a little. And again, if we click and hold with the eyedropper, we can see that the darker tone on this grating is located about there on the curve. So we can simply drag that down to make those particular tones darker, and you'll see we've got some really nice contrast happening here. So do remember to click and hold with the eyedropper so you can tell exactly which tones in the image you're working on. There's another little section there that I'd like to darken a little. If we move these points closer together, it will actually alter the contrast between those two particular tones. I want to drag the real shadows down a little, and I think perhaps I just want to very slightly darken those. So we'll simply add a point there, like so, and just drag those down just a little more. Now the threshold slider, that controls local contrast, and with a fairly low radius setting you won't see much difference with that, but at a high radius setting it does have quite an effect indeed. To get the idea of how this works, it's very similar to the unsharp mask filter, in that in effect behind the scenes this is overlaying a grayscale version of the image and blurring it to a certain extent. If we set the radius too high, you'll see, and this is often seen in HDR images, that we have these terrible halos appearing, and we really don't want that. Essentially, if you've got a large, highly detailed image, you want to keep your radius value fairly low. We can still push up the threshold for some more contrast, but with the radius, as soon as you start to see these awful halos appearing, just back off on the radius values a little. We can also insert corner points on the curve itself to protect particular ranges of tones. You see, if I move this point at the moment, the whole curve is equalized in accordance with how much I move this point. But if we select this one we just added and we click on corner, we can then see that if we add another point here and drag it, that particular point stays in exactly the same place. So the tones aren't equalized across that division. So essentially here, tone mapping your image is just a case of very carefully manipulating this curve exactly the way you want it, and this can take quite a while, but it's really worth spending your time on this part of the process. Okay, so when you're happy with the result, we simply click OK, and that will convert the image to a 16-bit image, so we can do more work on it within Photoshop itself. From now on, you can add a contrast curve or tweak the levels, or use the color balance image adjustment, which is often a good idea with these images. The colors in HDR images straight from conversion can be a bit haywire sometimes, so I think with this one we'll just introduce a little more blue in the mid-tones and probably just a spot more cyan up there, like so. And we can also add a small contrast curve just to punch things up a little. There you go. Click OK to that. And of course, finally, we want to add some sharpening via Sharpen and Unsharp Mask. So do have a go at Convert to HDR. Do remember, when you shoot the bracketed shots originally, they really want to be at least one stop apart, and it's vitally important to either use a tripod or rest your camera on something very solid so you get as little movement between the images as possible.